Hello, welcome everyone. Thanks so much for taking the time today to join us. My name is Mark Howells. I'm a chief strategist at Dakota Ridge Marketing. We're a technology marketing company helping out MSPs and tech advisors and vendors and everyone with their multi-channel marketing. And I am very excited today, honestly, because this is such a new topic and something that's really interesting to me, which is just basically our tabletop exercises done for. They aren't needed. Let's gamify them. Let's do something a little different here. And I am joined by AJ Lease today of Brekade. And AJ, if you don't mind taking the floor and telling us a little bit about yourself.
Yeah, thanks very much for having me, Mark. So I've been in the information security space for a little over 10 years now. And I realized the big hard part of getting people to engage with this activity was simply the engagement piece. The best parts of information security come from when you get to solve the problems that you can identify. And these exercises were supposed to do that. And they didn't seem to do that. So I dusted off some of my teaching expertise that I gained throughout my career, coupled it with my love of games and fun and play, and put it together in a whole accessible way for your business to actually find these business resiliency problems and the underlying tech that supports them.
Nice. That's wonderful. And just a couple housekeeping items before we really jump into this topic. I know we're scheduled today for about 30 minutes, we may go over, but just a heads up on that. We have been doing kind of a series of sessions on literally all different types of topics. Have never obviously tackled this one. That's why I'm excited about it. If you guys do have any questions or comments or anything, please just throw them in chat and we will see them in here and potentially bring them up on screen. What's really cool, which we have never tackled before, but I'm excited to do this, is AJ came up with the idea to have kind of I'll call it a trivia setup of all of you who are, cyber experts and want to show your chops to go through this gamification exercise that we'll get to, and then just try to answer these different scenarios and try to work out the pieces. So I think, AJ, let me know if I'm incorrect here, but we're going to have people just kind of use the chat and work through things as a team effort today.
Yep. Yep, correct. Cool. So what you're actually going to get is a very short and condensed version of the game that started all of this, Incidents and Accidents, where you will become part of the incident response team for Horse Renderer, a glue manufacturer with a very significant e-commerce platform that's about to have a really bad day. So you'll have to go through and work through the challenges, the pieces of it, in order to bring the business back online and resolve the incident. So you get a chance to do that at the end. And then, yes, of course, your contributions all just through the chat.
Nice. Okay. So let's start really with the kind of Q&A side of things. Just wanted to lay the groundwork before we jump into the demo, if you will, or just the platform. So first up, and I was actually just talking to somebody recently about this, and they were like, I love tabletop exercises. It's the theater of the mind, and we can get people to imagine what would happen if this scenario occurred, and then the magic happens and we get to this amazing outcome. It sounds like you're not on the same boat as them, on the same page as them. So yeah. Really, first one would just be, why are traditional tabletop exercises falling short?
So for starters, I'd love kind of that idealism, the person you were speaking to previously. For what it's worth, the tabletop exercise in its original intent, I think, had really good initial intentions. That was the whole point. We get together in a room, we paint ourselves a word picture, and we get to understand what's wrong with the business in a way that matters. But the reality of these is you're sitting in a conference room full of people whose names you've only seen in corporate press releases, who are so important they don't even send their own emails. And now you're about to sit there and tell them the millions that they've spent on their security program isn't going to defend the revenue generating parts of the business. It isn't going to keep the business running. So many of those, all of a sudden now the security program's on its best behavior. The logs have absolutely been looked at today. They haven't been ignored for the last 8 months. We are absolutely monitoring all 478 use cases in here. We certainly have not excluded any of them. At this point, we've gone ahead and created this problem where the bad news that needs to get to the decision makers has been heavily watered down before we even really have a chance to do anything about it. So this tabletop exercise, because of the nature of it, we're sitting in a boardroom. It's filled with people, again, whose titles we only recognize from the very public spaces that we're in our workplace. It's created this problem where we're kind of hesitant to really come out with the real core problems, because we're now in front of the people who can turn around and go, wait a minute, I thought we spent a bunch of money fixing this. And so the curiosity then becomes, well, when we get hit, I thought we had an exercise that covered all this. Why is this still a problem? Why should I spend more money in my security budget? I'm not really getting any return on that investment. And then just purely from the employee engagement standpoint, it's one more thing in a sea of things that they'd have to do. And we're now going to get together again in the same boardroom, and we're going to explore all the ways that the business is going to go wrong. And somebody somewhere is going to think that I can't do my job. So it turns into this, right from the get-go, before we even get started, we have this captive audience problem where none of us want to be there. Most of us are just there so we don't get fired. We're now going to have a really awkward conversation about the most expensive parts of the business that some people have been told work and are seamless and ready to go. And the reality is, the 16-year-old living in the basement, phoning the help desk, asking for domain admin, still gets those creds, and we still have this problem. So it's a lot of things. It's a series of cascading issues. It all starts with a lack of curiosity from your attendees. It leads to a lack of engagement in the process, which then gets us to a point where we can't get the gaps identified that we need to, and the business decision makers aren't getting the full story.
Gotcha. Okay. Do you feel like the scenarios are somewhat repetitive as well?
Yeah, I think there's a temptation for some to maybe use very repetitive scenarios, and there is a valid approach to using repetitive scenarios. We had a scenario, we went and fixed these problems. Now let's see if this works again, right? Let's double check we actually did this correctly and that the muscle memory is there. But the repetition in the scenarios is definitely a bit of a secondary problem. There's a certain degree of from both sides. The scenario generators create some of these really fantastical approaches to things, whereas it's like, hey, we never evaluated if somebody just walked off with a core server. And then there's other parts where it's like, well, that would never happen. The probability of this is so low that to put this in the risk register and just leave it like, I don't even care. Right. So there's a bit of a concern for the probability versus the approach. And I think when it comes to the scenarios, there needs to be a likelihood primarily based on the industry of operations, where the revenue generating assets tend to be, and how to actually hit the business right in the bottom line. And a lot of scenarios tend not to do that. It's just, we're just going to have some ransomware in the environment and see what happens, which again has value, but it is severely diminishing value because we don't really evaluate a lot of the things we need to see with this.
Gotcha. Okay. And before we kind of flip the coin, if you will, and learn more about just the gamification side and really why it's the preferred alternative, would love to hear, feedback from people. Just throw it in chat. If you're using tabletop exercises, if you use kind of gamification side, any software element, if you're not using anything at all, I know there's a lot of, MSPs and MSSPs on who may provide these, services and everything, but just interested to see that. So really, let's flip the coin again. Why is gamification the preferred alternative now?
Yeah, I will absolutely open this up with a big, heavy disclaimer. Gamification is not the solution to everything. It really isn't. But when you think about this problem, this exercise problem, the engagement piece is one of the biggest things that's going to stop you dead in the exercise before you even get really anywhere going. Playing a game and abstracting away from the day-to-day is what we really need. And a game does that better than anything else because it balances both this logical and this creative element of our thinking at the same time. A well-done game should be a collaborative one in nature. We're not competitive. We're all working together and we're fighting kind of this malevolent force that we can neither see nor interact with, but it has impacted us in some way. So when you wrap gamification around some of these requirements, you get a lot of really excellent collaboration. It works like its own security truth serum because people are having fun. And in that fun is where you get all that honesty. So now when we push the find logs button in the game and the critical failure pops up that says, these haven't been looked at for 8 months, everybody has a nice big laugh. And then somebody goes, 8 months, that's generous. We've never looked at that. That's going right on the report. all of a sudden we have real actionable intelligence about our business right now, and everybody feels really comfortable bringing it to the front because we're having fun. That layer of abstraction that comes from a gameplay, whether we're playing a board game or like a big outdoor game or a video game, we do project some of ourselves into the experience. That's just the way that we as humans work. So when we do this in the ecosystem of work, we still project some of what we do into it, but we can still also abstract ourselves away enough that I don't feel like I'm being attacked because I don't know how to do something. I feel comfortable coming up with, I don't actually know how to go and follow this process because it's really onerous and difficult to follow in a crisis situation. I feel very comfortable talking about that, knowing again that we're just playing, we're just simulating. And the benefit to this is it covers off the it's not real aspect. Because gamification is a very visual approach, it's a very visual and interactive approach. Instead of sitting there in a boardroom, 3 PowerPoint slides and in one ear and out the other, you now have this ability to, at some point, tangibly interact with what it is this exercise is trying to accomplish. That almost eliminates the this could never happen to us scenario. This would never happen. Oh, if this happened, we'd be in really big trouble. Correct. And the probability is quite low, but if it happens, that impact is really significant. And let's see what that looks like. Yeah, I'm listening. And because we play something, because it's a very interactive approach, because it gets people into the process, the feedback that the stakeholders get is enormous. People turn around and go, I had so much fun at that. I've never had a single tabletop exercise in the traditional fashion where non-technology parts of the business, like HR, payroll, finance, et cetera, where they turn to the security stakeholder that set it up and go, I want to come to every single one of these in the future. But that's just a Tuesday for me. That happens every time because they had a chance to participate in a way that made sense. It didn't talk down to them in any way for not knowing something. And all we were there to do was the same thing the original tabletop exercise intent was set up for. Find the problems and get in front of them before it becomes a problem. And that's it. But it just set that because we have this ability to just wrap a few extra layers of creativity, logic, limitations, and abstraction and projection into it, we get a really interesting mix in our business.
Gotcha. Wow. Yeah, I always before, especially a talk like this, where you're obviously the expert, and shifting to that gamification side is a new idea for me. So I always like
new idea for most.
Yeah. Look up, information and data on it. And so O'Reilly found that gamified cybersecurity training actually increased knowledge retention by 40% compared to traditional. I mean, that's a nice bump.
Yep. And when you think about what that knowledge retention means, so the difficulty now becomes in my end. I have to work harder as a result of this, which is, I guess, maybe good or bad. It's good if you're my clients because it means I earn more per hour from, your value goes a lot further. Bad for my case because now I got to work a little harder and be a lot smarter. From the practitioner standpoint, now because 40%, we have that massive bump in the knowledge retention. The incentive is now, what are we trying to retain? Knowledge-wise, what problem are we trying to solve? What are we trying to address here with this? And in the process, we now have to make it so that sticks. So if we're thinking about conventional phishing training, what's the behavior I'm really trying to train? Do I want people to stop clicking links in emails? No, because so many legitimate ones pass through in order to do our job. Do I want people to look and examine? Technically, no. My phishing training doesn't work like that. It teaches you to think how your adversaries do, because the behavior shift is, I want you to think evil and act good. That's the notion. And with incidents and accidents, it's the same. I want you to think about this from the perspective of both the incident responders giving up their weekends, because that's a story that's being told. I want you to think about this from the business decision makers perspective of where can we appropriate resources, time, skills, money, tooling, process, wherever it needs to be, so that the revenue generating parts of the business continue to flow in the event of these adverse effects. So now the behavior change is multifold. Better investment of the resources, more strategic viewpoints of the resources, and just a better security culture in general, because those are two really big things that stand in the way.
Mm-hmm. Gotcha. So in kind of simulating things, just a question came up on how does it simulate it well? And what I was wondering about was specifically just the time spent coming up with scenarios, guiding the group, like all these elements that is just, a small resources hit, but it is time spent doing all these things. I mean, you're able to just say, here's your here's your setup, right?
Right. Yeah. In a way, setting up a game properly, this is where the practitioners have to decide kind of how much they're going to put into it.
Mm.
For my games, I like a bit of variability in the outcome. So incidents and accidents very, very accurately bakes in some of the problems you're going to encounter in incident response. And that is to showcase that even with all the things going right, it can still go wrong. And it can still be very expensive. So when it comes to the scenarios, you really want to start with what are some of the threat actors that are operating in this industry, and what does some of that tradecraft look like? What are the motivations? And with that motivation, how can I, knowing, because when you're doing these, you get a little bit of insight from the threat piece, from the defense piece, and from the business piece. So you have to combine all these things. Knowing a little of what I know, if I gather this information as a threat actor, how could I impact this business in such a way that they're down for a week, a month, a year? And then what does that cost? Do I do it from a cyber espionage perspective? Am I doing it financially? What does some of that discussion become? And then in the process, it becomes, well, what's the tech piece, right? How technically are we going to do this? But that's almost an afterthought in a lot of these, because once you get to the heart of the tech that underpins these business processes, the notion of there's always a way is valid. We can discuss the probability after the fact, and then we can fine tune those outputs. So the scenario generation, first and foremost, has to be, how would you mess with this company, knowing what you know about how the business runs, the defenses in place, and the way the threat actors work. And then you kind of take a few steps back going, okay, well, here's what the threat actors would have to do in order to get this far. Here's the way the tooling would have to fall down. Here's the way the processes and stuff would have to fall down. And here's the way the business would need to be impacted. Overall, it does wind up being a bit of an intense process. So whatever you can do to streamline that. But this is a process you're going to have to go through even with a traditional one anyway, if you're going to do this well. So one way or another, you're coming at it from that approach. You're just wrapping a bit of fun around it.
Okay, cool. Good to know. We actually had a question from Jason, and well, first a comment, great session. Thank you to AJ.
Thanks,
and then how can we evaluate the effectiveness of gamification?
Yeah, there's a few ways. So if you're not keeping score in the game to some degree, you're missing out on a pretty big opportunity. So my games take in your revenue. How much did this business process generate for your business last year, this month? How big is this thing in your organization, and what does it cost to replace it if it doesn't work? Those are numbers that get put in there. What's the rounded hourly cost of your incident response team? So every time you have an executive in the IR group, every time you have directors, senior directors, comms teams, network, server, all these people, those, if they're in your incident response plan, you have to have their attention the whole time. What is the hourly rate of your incident response team? That gets put in there. As far as the tooling, what tooling do you have in there? We don't even look at it from a tooling perspective of when was the last time you went and audited this firewall? When was the last time you did all this? We're just assuming you have these problems because they're probably in there. And so we can go ahead and add all these different numbers into it. And by the time we even close the game session, before we even hung up the phone, we can tell you this is what it's going to cost. This is the net impact, and here's why this matters. The long tail efficacy of this comes from, did we actually go and fix the problems that we found? In the process of doing the gap piece, did we go and close these off? If yes, we can have another session. Music to my ears. I'll happily run you through another one. We have another one where we run the same scenario and we evaluate what's here and what's not, and whether or not it works. If you're unfortunate enough to encounter an incident after this, how much faster were you able to find these important artifacts to do these things that you needed to do? How much more confident did you feel when the phone rang and said, hey, we have a problem inbound, and you were ready to go with it? How quickly were you able to get your team to a point where they understood your processes, the outreach, everything that had to happen? Those are the measurements that you kind of have to keep up inside the business, but they're operational measurements that also tell you how well your investment is doing with your security program and by extension, your business resiliency. So the short answer is it really depends on the amount of effort, clients are willing to put into it. The long answer is the more data you can put into this and the more measurement you can wrap around it, the more granular you can get.
Gotcha. Okay. My mind, of course, goes to just transitioning, right? Yes, I'm bought in. I'm excited about this, but I'm sure there's going to be some challenges, especially internally. I would guess if people are used to this way and now I have to shift to that. Yeah. Ensuring games stay relevant to real world threats, all these different elements. Like, what are the main challenges that you see?
The hardest part, honestly, is just kind of this can't work. It doesn't work like that. What do you mean I can have fun while I'm at work and it covers off some of the other crap on my to-do list? Oh yeah,
That's
and
not allowed. I'm sorry.
right, and we can do this from noon to 4 on a Friday? Like, no, so there's a disbelief that comes with
Hmm.
it. And once you move past that, then yeah, it becomes okay. Well, you need somebody kind of in the middle, right? Like a director or a manager, somebody involved in that kind of decision-making capacity where they're willing to take the risk. We know this is a problem and we want to do something different. Trying to sell this to a board can be difficult if they're, maybe not of the young hip variety. But the reality is, at the director level, they have a lot of discretion over some of the training and even consulting level outcomes that they have at their disposal. So when you position it to them and you showcase, hey, listen, you're going to be doing this anyway. Right. Some of you have annual tabletop requirements per your PCI standards or whatever other standards that you might be attesting to. You're going to have to do this anyway. So wouldn't it be great if it actually did a lot while you're at it, covered off a bunch of things? So showcasing that value really came from, I understand how busy you are. I understand that there's a lot of blind spots in the business that you're probably personally responsible for to some degree, as in if they get exploited, you're the one that gets personally named. Whether it was your problem or not is irrelevant. And then coming from the factor of, if you want people to be engaged and see the value that you have in the business with your teams and the skills and the investment needed, this is for you, because this will do that.
Gotcha.
Yeah. So that's the hard part, is the convincing. But I found once people have a chance to play and they get a chance to interact with it, even especially at that director level, it's a pretty easy sell, because I see it immediately, and it winds up being pretty sticky. And then the feedback becomes, okay, hey, bring HR, payroll, finance, all these non-tech people to this experience. Mm-hmm. They turn around and go, I learned so much today. I had no idea that so much was involved. I'm going to be a little more vigilant, a lot more attentive. And senior management starts to go, I didn't actually realize just the level of effort that it takes to do this. Let's figure this out. And those are very real outcomes I've seen from all my clients.
That's pretty cool from not only a retention perspective, I'm sure, for you, but just from a business perspective internally of how that can affect people working together and everything, of like, wait, I had no idea that's, the level of what you're doing.
The whole thing is a team building exercise under the hood too. So it takes away this learning in a cubicle. Obviously, remote sessions notwithstanding, everybody is still working together on it. But one of the follies, I think, that comes from just conventional security training in general, and maybe by extension corporate training, is this misguided belief that we can sit in a cubicle and we can consume it atomically, and then that's going to work. And it has some value, but that value is really heavily diminishing. And again, if you consider one more thing in a sea of things, if I don't get this done today, it's the last day. HR is going to come and overwater my houseplants over the weekend. It's going to be this problem that now it's just, I'm going to leave it up and I'm going to scroll through and do whatever I got to do. Yeah, good enough. Click next, right? Because we're now even measuring how long the screen has been up in some of this training. So if you go through it too quickly, it's like, oh no, you couldn't have consumed it. Go back and do it again. So it just creates this annoying problem. But when we take people out of the cubicles, either physically or, again, just kind of metaphorically, when we eliminate this learning in a cubicle problem, we bring back the social value of learning. And that social value of learning is so important, and especially in a corporate space. And what it really does is it eliminates this, I've got to get these emails out, I've got to get this spreadsheet done, because the person who needs it is probably sitting just over there in the room, same as you. So for at least the next couple hours, nobody's looking for me, so I can just sit here and be with this. There's a game involved. There's a lot of fun. A big component of the game is the little Easter eggs, references, the jokes, the familiarity that comes with it. And all of that combined now turns into really accessible security training that doesn't tell you not to click on something. It says, here's how people will mess with you in the pursuit of getting to click you on something, getting you to click on something.
Yeah.
It's more ingrained, it's better, it works more reliably, and it does generate that behavior change. And then afterwards, now the momentum can stay, because the people who were involved, even if they aren't in the security program, go, that was awesome. I had a great time. Thank you again. You see them in the halls, you see them online. Hey, we got any more games coming up? Very real. And it just keeps that culture and that conversation going, and it works very quickly.
Nice. That's great. I want to get into it. Last question real quick before we do that. We probably have, as I said, some MSPs, MSSPs on the call or watching later. How could they leverage, the findings from this into kind of service line items, if you will, in a proposal?
Yeah. So the concept of an assessment to sell more services certainly isn't novel, and it is a very viable approach. Obviously, every organization has to be a little careful, because if you are doing some compliance level assessments, you may have to kind of wall off away from that. So obviously, again, big heavy disclaimer: make sure you're not creating more problems for you by doing this. But when you get the security truth serum, when you get to the root of the real problems in the business, because of the way that I've stood up the games, and you'll see it when we get to it, there is a really big opportunity for us to almost complete a bit of a checkbox exercise without completing one. And in that process, we can create these configurations that we can customize, again, for the business or for the service provider looking to do it. And what is missing winds up becoming its own line item, and your clients will volunteer that information in this process. And so if you're willing to show up as a real partner on this process and go, yeah, hey, we have this thing, it's a third party, he doesn't work for either of us, he's just here to find these problems. And then you turn around and you go, well, here's how we would solve some of what got found, because you brought the game, you brought the assessment to them. There's already a trusted, established partnership. And there's a recall thing that happens with this game too, where it's like, oh yeah, that was really fun, I had a good time, and I actually have a few questions about some of what we found in this. Half of that conversation's done now. When you're in sales, especially in security services sales, getting somebody even just to pick up the phone and go, yeah, okay, we can make next Thursday happen, like just that friction alone is significant. So if you can do anything to diminish that, that's a big step. And if it's now in this situation where, hey, we played and we found all these problems and we can solve 3 to 5 of these, and we can outsource the remaining ones, that, and keep an eye on that with you, you're now a service provider in a partnership with them, and businesses really, really like those engaged providers.
Gotcha. Very nice. Well, without further ado, let's jump into it. I'll bring it up, and with a shout out to Easter eggs. Hopefully everyone notices Bowser up there behind him as we're about to jump into a game here.
I don't have a boss, so he's my boss. He's the boss.
The boss.
The boss.
All right. Fabulous. So we're going to bring up the screen.
And make sure in the chat, just, yep. Because we'll need stuff in the chat.
Okay.
So like if because there will be questions that come from this, and so like as in questions to the audience. So yeah, just pop in the chat as you feel ready. Okay, let's do it. So just a bit of background. So Horse Renderer, we take inedible horse parts and turn them into sticky situations. Our small glue startup handles all of the e-commerce footprint in-house. And for now, we outsource the glue manufacturing elsewhere with our own proprietary formula. Our e-commerce platform processes on average 417 transactions an hour, which works out to roughly 3.6 million annually, give or take. To keep each transaction high, we offer free shipping at $99. And our best-selling product is a unique scrapbooking glue, which rings in at $44 a bottle. Most customers purchase 3, since shipping is a flat rate of $50, and this means each transaction is at least $132. So if I'm buying 1 bottle of glue, it's $44 plus $50 to ship. We're at $94. So that doesn't really make sense. If I'm buying 2, we're now at $138, I think is what it came to. So it makes sense for me to buy the 3rd, because now I get free shipping. So it basically winds up being cheaper to get it. That's capitalism. That's just the way it works. So like everything, it starts with a notification. Our endpoint detect and response tooling identified a host currently infected with ransomware. Ransomware spreads quickly and encrypts data, rendering it unusable unless you're willing to pay within a set time frame. But we're not going to pay the ransom. That's not how any of this works. So as the incident response team, we have 5 abilities. We're going to play all 5 of them. Each one of these abilities will cost 10 of our mental capacity points, our ability points. This is to help simulate some of the human consideration with incident response. Just because you have a big team doesn't mean that big team isn't tired. So we wanted to simulate that in some degree. So we're going to play those in just a sec. I wanted to show you the business processes here. So we have our e-commerce sales. This is absolutely the crown jewel of the organization. It processes an awful lot of transactions every hour. When we keep in mind the isolation cost, this is what's going to cost the business every hour that this process is not operating fully to the extent that we need it to. Similarly, our glue manufacturing orders, we have an application in the business that we use to talk to the actual manufacturing and ordering process. But this piece here, there is a human in the loop. So if that process is down, it's not as expensive because we can just pick up the phone and place the orders manually. But It does take a little bit more time because we got to go through some of the old fashioned ways, with like pen and paper and everything else. We have the financial piece. It's where the money lives, loves, and gets lost from time to time. So this is just an overarching financial administration piece. We have HR, obviously just good human resources. Identity and access management. This is where our domain controllers and our ability to generate the shared resources lives. And then internal development, because we're an e-commerce shop, we need to be able to build our own stuff inside the house. So that's where all that goes. So now, the first thing we have to do is we have to find the scope of what's missing, of what's been hit. So emergency sort and file. Now to the group, identify 3 common methods of attacker persistence on endpoints. In this case, an endpoint is any platform with an operating system. So if it helps, we can think about it like a workstation and server. We'll go a little bit old school and kind of in that nature. So over the next 2 minutes, somebody wants to crank in the chat 3 common methods of attacker persistence on endpoints. We'll just pause it here. So these challenges, the way that they're designed, we can either have them from a training perspective, or we can have them from an actual validation perspective. They're very, very flexible. So we can actually go ahead and tell our businesses, go find this piece of equipment, go into this space and do this work, whatever it is that we have to do, because that piece is really important. So we can use these as the checkbox exercise that I mentioned before. Mark, is the chat broken, or is there just nobody here? That'd be fine if there's nobody here. That's okay too.
There's a few people watching. We just, everyone's shy today.
Everyone's too shy. No worries. Okay. So 3 common methods of attacker persistence. My favorite one is scheduled tasks or automated tasks, where attackers can now embed themselves in some of the basic functionality of your operating system and reinfect or reconnect as needed. There's certainly files on disk where I just drop something right on the actual disk piece itself. And then in the startup part of the operating system. So once we finish that, now we get a little bit of the story. So fortunately, a member of the tech team recently attended a webinar covering unusual methods of persistence and raised some concerns about fileless malware. A second pass through the infrastructure revealed no indications this occurred, but management appreciated the thorough approach and underlying skill. Fileless malware is malware that lives entirely out of disk. It basically lives in the registry is where you really see it. There's a lot of space in a registry to go hide different artifacts and different components of malware. And then part of the infection process would be to go collect all those different artifacts, combine it into something working, load it into memory, and then execute all the evil that it needs to do. So somebody went to a webinar. So we're talking team skills here. This is a chance to showcase the team skills associated with your security team, because the way this is built, we can have those conversations. Now, one of the things we like to do is keep tabs on how long things take in incident response. Back to the how do you measure effectiveness? We can keep an eye on how long things take. So yeah, that was a 2-minute challenge. If it took somebody 10 minutes to go figure out that answer, as opposed to just either having it right at top of mind or something documented, we can factor that in. So right now, this turn counter is just simply 1 hour of time, but we can get really flexible with what that looks like. So in this case, our investigation is complete, and we definitely have our glue e-commerce has been impacted. Our ability to order more glue has been impacted. We have a couple of people in finance, but not everybody. So we're in okay shape there. Human resources is definitely off the hook on this one. So we can go ahead and put the malicious resumes to bed. Our identity and access management is mostly intact, but a couple of our admin workstations got hit in the process. So we're going to want to dig into that. And our internal development team across the board. So whatever the heck they've been installing definitely seems to be contributory to the problem. And so one of the conversations now becomes, well, this is really widespread. Wouldn't we have caught this? The short answer is not necessarily. In a lot of cases, if you have good tooling can catch a lot of this commodity grade stuff, but it still slips by. So we want to evaluate this consideration of what happens when stuff gets in. Tooling processes and technology, tooling processes and human skills, they do take you a long way when you combine all 3 of those things together, but these things can still happen. So it's about evaluating what we do when it happens. So the next step is we want to isolate the affected assets from the business, so that they cannot create any problems. They cannot go ahead and further reinfect anything, because we're going to go through the remaining steps. So shields up is our effort here. Now we're going to want to determine a course of action to disconnect portions of a network from the internet and other non-compromised hosts. So in essence, we're quarantining or isolating parts of our environment in order to keep it safe for future processes. So if anyone wants to put in the chat how they would tackle that as the intrepid system administrators, I'd love to hear it. And if not, we can move it along. I got to get some music for this part, because when I play this part in sessions, especially if we're doing a game where you have to go into your business and do some of this work, this can be like a 10 to 20 minute process. And I had one client where everybody got all their challenges at once, and then everybody kind of scattered online to go and do this. And then there was like just 10 minutes of unrepentant silence sitting and hanging over everybody. So that became kind of annoying. But that's okay. We made it work. So yeah, in the future, who knows? Maybe I'll work on some Monty Python routines or something.
No, I like that. I like that.
Yeah.
I also I'm looking on live and using the restream that we're using. Full disclosure, it seems like they're actually pushing out at like almost a minute lag, which is not good.
Oh, okay.
So that's kind of going to affect our trivia setup here. So I apologize for that.
Okay, no worries. Well, that's good to know, right? So yeah, in this case, what would we do as the network administrators or the tech administrators? Isolating parts of our network so that we're going to remove access to them. That is an important part of security incident response, no doubt. But in reality, what we're also going to be doing is we're going to be heavily impacting the business's ability to function as intended. So this containment strategy, you do have to think about this from the perspective of when is a good time to do it? How do we do it? How do we make sure we got all of this in the process? So that's why the investigation piece needs to be done really well. And then you have to be very thorough, and then you have to work together as a team to come up with the approach. So a few ways that you can do it. If you have a good old-fashioned firewall separating different parts of the business, you can simply add some rules into that to some degree. If you're using a bit of a mix of hybrid and cloud, which is pretty common nowadays, yeah, you can turn around and just isolate parts of the office from the cloud instance. Depending on the way your cloud's stood up, again, you can just simply remove access to it from the public. So whatever that looks like is going to be in accordance with the way the business operates best. But there's a problem here. Turns out we didn't write down how to properly isolate sections of our infrastructure, and the only person who knew has long since left the company. We managed to figure it out, but it required disconnecting our entire e-commerce platform from the public at the same time. So this goes into the consideration of the processes and the procedures need to be tested, validated, and up to date, most importantly, because the one person who may have stood this up, who knew how to do it off the top of their head, found a winning lottery ticket under somebody's shoe and decided never to come to work ever again. The business needs to be able to operate in this situation. So documenting this and then validating that documentation still applies and is still relevant and still works is a very important part of incident response. Because right now what we have is the process. It took us a couple hours to go and figure out how to contain the network. And as a result, we now have basically every part of our business has some degree of disconnected from normal operations. So remember I mentioned the e-commerce was kind of the crown jewel of what we're doing here. Yeah, we can no longer take glue orders from our respective people. So one of the things we're going to have to do is inform our customers, going the extra smile. If anybody is a fan of that show Superstore, I'm personally a big fan. It's supposed to be smile, but they confuse it with smazel. And basically the whole thing is, if you ever worked retail, the idea is you have to talk to your customers a little bit more and build a lot more rapport, which is absolutely terrible, especially in retail sales. So now we're going to be doing some customer outreach. So this is a multiple choice game. Now that I know there's a bit of a minute delay, I'll just play through this kind of independently. So right now as a group, we get to decide what we're going to tell them. So we can either tell them everything, we have nothing to hide and everything to gain by being transparent. So we can just simply say the business experienced a tech outage. We don't know when it's coming back online. Conversely, we can tell them nothing. We can't undo anything we get wrong, so we're better off not saying anything to anyone ever. If anybody phones and goes, why can't I place any glue through your website? Just say, well, it's working on our end. It must be a you problem, right? I can ping the router. It's probably okay. Or we can just the facts as we know them. Nothing more, nothing less. We observed an intrusion, acted quickly to identify and contain the problem. Everything's offline while we evaluate it. As updates emerge, we'll inform the public. So you can technically pick either one of, well, you can pick any of these if you really want. We'll pick this one. So now that we have a message that we're going to move forward with, we have to figure out how to distribute it. So we can either just get a social media post, we can email blast. The smoke signals in the snail mail are just purely to mess around. So we'll pick the snail mail because that makes sense. And what's the source of truth? If we're asking our customers to refer back to an important piece of the business, where are we going to post that source of truth? Where are we going to tell them to refer back to it? Because once news gets out, court of public opinion, it's going to be a considerable issue. So we have to figure out kind of who, how we're going to direct it. I think in this case, because we're scrapbookers, we'll do the whole newspaper thing. There's probably at least a few who collect newspapers. And then finally, the timing. When do we want to do this? So we'll send it out tomorrow. Should be okay. So that's the customer interaction piece. And the beauty part about the way this is designed is the customer interaction is 100% designed to be an unknown. We don't know how well it's going to work until the end, where we'll get to that. So now that we've successfully identified the problem, contained everything in the business, and went ahead, and now it's time to eradicate the threat. So in this case, what we're going to be doing is we're going to be looking for all the sources of persistence. So earlier on when I mentioned the methods of persistence, now we're going to want to either eliminate those with a nice clean image of our workstations. Images in this case are just backups of our systems to some degree that we know are good and safe. So we might go ahead and find these images and make sure that they aren't affected with this either. We're going to look in and see if those methods of persistence are still there. And if not, we're going to go ahead and start the eradication process. So it's a good thing we had multiple images for many systems. The bad thing is they're a little out of date. So when you build some of this, as the business grows and evolves, new applications get brought in, more data gets added. But if you're not somehow maintaining that level of backup capability, the imaging management piece, you're going to have to go through and redo some of this. You're going to have to go add some of that manually in some capacity or another. So in this case, we're mostly intact, but we're going to have to do a couple of rounds of installs, and so we're good to go. So now, again, the businesses that make the money, right? E-commerce. Okay, so we have no threats remaining, and all of these are now the same. That's we can definitely save a bit of time on that because this is the movie magic part of the game. So our last piece is now we have to recover the business and bring everything back online. So one of the best things that we have in our operations as security and tech people is this notion of backups. If somebody messes something up, we can restore from known good backups. We can restore from known good images. That's kind of the eradication backup piece. But what happens when those business resilient systems, those business critical systems aren't backed up, or when backups aren't an option? There's more than enough of this out there where we weren't backing up a very critical system and now it has to be rebuilt manually. Very, very common. So this might be a problem where a contractor came in and built this 5 years ago and we just never bothered to back it up. There was a tool that I used internally in an organization once that was just sincerely beautiful. Nobody clicked the back this up in the process, and then the contractor that built it left, and everybody relying on that tool loved it, and it was great until one day it all went offline, and we couldn't use it anymore, and nobody could rebuild it. So basically, that really beneficial functionality to the business evaporated overnight because nobody bothered to back it up correctly. So how do you rebuild a business critical system when backups aren't an option? Well, that's where you're going to have to refer to your documentation of whatever you have. If you don't have any of that, then you're starting right from scratch with, let's go through the systems design process if you don't maintain any of those records. So even going back into some of those old project files to figure out what was done, who did it, what was needed, what were some of the problems we ran into. If you're unlucky enough to do that, and that is a business critical application, that rebuild might be very expensive. So it is worth thinking about a little. So in a fortuitous display of working smarter, not harder, an administrator was tired of dealing with the interns breaking some of our critical revenue generating systems in production. To address this, they added their own secret local backups of the important configuration, which they were able to roll onto the systems almost instantly. They have since amended this script so that every time it gets used, automatically inserts a next day meeting with management to discuss arrays. And so again, this is back to the single points of knowledge and the team skills, because those pieces are really, really important. And you need all of them in order to work. So if our processes and procedures are incomplete, or we're missing something, or something doesn't work, you want skilled people who can kind of MacGyver some of this together and bring everything back online, because that skill is ultimately kind of your last line of defense, but it works very, very well. And cultivating that in your people, it's an investment from the business standpoint. The people appreciate it because now you've shown that you're investing in them, and your business benefits because now I have all these trained people doing amazing things. Just don't forget to write down what it is that they learned and how they implemented it in the business. So we're officially back online. We're accepting Glue again. Okay, now we're back online and accepting Glue again. Sweet. Glue orders, ship it out. Life's good. Everything's good. So basically now we're at the end. The game is done. So we just end the game. And remember, I mentioned this discussion about costs. How do we measure the efficacy of our process? Well, our labor costs, there's on average a $15,000 cost. The way that this works is this is just a nice round number. By the way, Horse Render is not a real company, so please don't go look them up. But the cost of every hour of their incident response plan is about $15,000, what it takes. So that labor cost, yeah, that added up pretty steep. Process downtime hours, this is a collection. So if you have individual assets in a process, those aren't operating at their optimal capacity or the way that they're intended. There's actually some knock-on effects throughout the business too. And so just because you couldn't accept Glue orders and you couldn't manage the financial piece to the fullest extent and what have you, there are some other intended effects. This is now 24 hours of labor hour or work process hour that we're going to have to make up somewhere, because in the time that this was down, somebody else couldn't do another part of their job. And in most cases, they were probably just kind of peering around looking at, oh, how's the incident going? How's things going? When we cover process containment costs, analyzing this is, again, just what is that process worth to the business? How long has it been unavailable? And what did we actually lose in the process? The other consideration is we couldn't accept revenue. Our core revenue driver, selling Glue online, was down. And a big important piece to think about is how replaceable is your product, is your service, or your delivery to your customers. And in the case of something like Glue for scrapbooking, scrapbookers are notoriously brand loyal, and they probably have a couple that they really, really like and will keep kind of in the wings. But they go through a lot of glue. That's like the glue and paper are some of the biggest expenses for scrapbookers. So they buy a lot of it and they're willing to go elsewhere if they're in a hurry for it, because they might be doing a project or whatever. There's a timeline. I know it kind of sounds weird. Like, we're crafts? Like, that's, yeah, you have to think about this from that business perspective, and especially in the information security space. So because we couldn't accept Glue orders, coupled with our labor costs and some of the other isolation costs that led into other business downtime, this incident actually became very expensive. And we were only technically down for 7 hours, right? Technically speaking. But again, when we think about these knock-on costs and what some of this is now coming out of somebody's budget. This is coming out of somebody's bonus. This might be enough to shut your company down, depending on what your cash flow looks like. This could be it. This could be all of it, especially with this customer impact. So remember, we don't know how valuable our customer impact is until we find out firsthand. And in this case, this is just kind of a bit of the way these roles are set up. It's a little bit of randomization, but if you have customer research and you want to put that data in there, it's absolutely plumbed in for that. So in this case, almost 70% of our customers just won't come back. So remember when I mentioned customers are brand loyal? They sure are. But if I couldn't get to your Glue, and I found the other one that I liked and it actually worked better for the project, part of the buying process, especially with a very short sales cycle like this, is the customer habit. People will go buy stuff out of customer habits. If you upend that customer habit because of this problem, they just may, oh, well, I couldn't get Glue last time and it turns out this other one's a lot better. So now they're going to stick with it. So if you time this right as an attacker, or if somebody gets to you during the very busy holiday shopping season, that could be it. A really bad time and a really bad day. We keep tabs on the time, right? How long this took to resolve overall, so that we can have the conversation of eventually you're going to have to get your people something to eat and somewhere to sleep. So that's the human consideration of the incident response. But I think my favorite part of this whole game entirely is it's 100% PowerPoint free. None. We just close the window and we're done. So that's incidents and accidents. That's gamification of tabletop exercises in a bit of a shell. The best thing I would say that you could do is decide to do something different with this part of your program, and understanding that people want to engage with this. Give them the opportunity. People want to be a part of something that actually makes sense, that feels a little bit bigger than themselves, that really does benefit the business. So give them every opportunity you possibly can. And everybody's there to learn something, including you, the security team, because at some point you're going to gain a ton of information about how the business really runs and what underpins the entire value. And if you're having a hard time selling your security services and your solutions, whether you're a service provider, both either internally or as an external vendor, part of the reason you're not breaking through is you can't really tell them why this matters to the business in dollars and cents. So yeah, hey, we'll help you patch every vulnerability. Do I care? I only care about these 4 business processes because 80% of my revenue comes from right here. Make sure this gets to happen. I don't care about the rest. That's the mentality of a business person. So you got to get in that head a little bit. And that's one of the ways that you do it. If your solutions are good, they'll sell themselves. They really will.
Yeah. No, I appreciate it. Thank you so much for going through all that. Sorry, the technology and everything wasn't there to align.
Yeah, okay.
But no, it looks like a great way to pull together so many aspects of the exercise overall, and definitely is a fun way. I enjoyed.
And we went through that pretty quick, right? Usually there's a lot more time for everything to breathe. Obviously, I didn't want to take up everybody's time. Right. Kind of the sweet spot for these is about 2.5, 3 hours. So turn them into a bit of an event, get some coffee, get some pastries in there, get people into it, knowing that, hey, listen, we're just going to be playing, we're just going to be having a good time, but we're also going to be helping our business in the process. Whatever we say here, you kind of get a layer of immunity in the process, because no, this didn't happen to us. It happened to Horse Renderer. That's a different company, but let's go make sure this can't happen to us. That's kind of the mentality that we're after.
Gotcha. Yeah. And the cherry on top for me was the Star Wars Easter egg. You're all clear, kid.
Yeah,
so that was.
Yeah, there's another one in there too. If anyone's ever played that game Subnautica, I was really into that game Subnautica for a very long time. I still am. I think it's a wonderful game. But when you get into the submarine, it says "Welcome aboard, all systems online." And I just thought that was such a brilliant little cool. I feel good about this, even though I've crash landed on this planet full of horrible monsters in the ocean.
I feel much better.
I feel much better about it. My submarine likes me. I'm good.
Well, AJ, thank you so much again for all the great dialogue about gamification of these and showcasing the platform as well. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, I appreciate it. If anyone's looking to reach out, LinkedIn is going to be the best way to get me right now. I'm in the middle of a rebrand between my former brand, Syntax Security Solutions, is now becoming Brekade. So yeah, I'm kind of in this weird shoulder season with this rebrand piece. So your best bet is to reach out to me directly on LinkedIn if you have any questions or curiosity.
Perfect. All right. Well, thank you, everyone. And if you're watching after, thanks for